I hope you don't mind if I preach a little bit, but we're going to talk about today in this episode of Inside Strategic Relations what is good. Now, this is not meant to be philosophical as much as to stimulate your thinking. There are certain things in life that we can all agree are good. Now, depending on the time frame of society and political pressures, economic pressures, there are things that maybe are good now that aren't good in the past, or that are good now that won't be good in the future. But there is a fundamental part of accurate thinking that helps you know what is good and what is bad. And so these are the good versus evil. This is the things that are build sustainable solutions and the things that have unintended consequences. Now, this thing of right and wrong is, there's some cultural influences to it, but ultimately, if you look across many different religions, some of you guys know that I do study comparative religion, and across the Abrahamic religions, particular, the good is good, bad is bad. Good is always good, and bad is always bad. Now, in other religions, they have similar parallels, but we're not going to talk specifically about what I believe to be good, or what I believe to be bad, or what you or a particular culture believes to be good or bad. I want to look at specifically what is good by definition so that you have a mental framework to identify, judge, and measure the good of a thing and the bad of a thing. Now, in reality, there is no absolute good and there is no absolute bad in the day-to-day context of what we do. We use absolute good and absolute bad as mental models in order to frame a judgment. So when someone says the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, that is a comparative relationship that they're using to make a decision by saying, what would Jesus do, or what would Muhammad do, or what would Buddha do, versus what would Beelzebub do, or versus what would Satan do, or versus what would this other demon do. And so the angel is the absolute of good, and the demon is absolute of evil, and that is a framework that we're using to judge maybe morality, cultural situations, how someone expresses themselves, what kind of clothing someone wears. And again, those are frameworks designed to help us think. So when we're looking at what is good, we're not necessarily trying to get to the absolute good. So what is good for the parents may not be good for the kid. What is good for the kid may not be good for the parents. But ultimately, in operating a household, there are times where the parents must compromise in order to teach good lessons to the child. And so the parents might be fine for an adult to stay up all night and watch movies and talk and stuff like that. But a kid needs to go to bed at a certain time because the kid's body's developing differently. The kid's got different hormone levels. The kid's got different experiences or obligations during the workday, where the parents are individuals, and it's the same thing. Maybe the parents don't get to see each other during the day, so they want to spend a little more quality time together after the kid's gone to bed. And so it is not one rule for thee and another rule for me. These are two different individuals with different needs and obligations that have to be considered individually. But you don't want to look at this from a relativistic standpoint where you're able to rationalize why you do something even though you know the thing you do is not good for you. So in the example of staying up too late, there are studies that show that staying up past 10 p.m. in your local time, so the sun's going down, it's 10 p.m. local time, and you're still awake, actually increases your chance of a heart attack by 50%. Now, why is this? Well, your circulatory system has been going all day long. You've got pressure on the system. Your body needs to rest. So about 10 p.m. is the time that this particular research paper found was the kind of the cutoff, and so you should go to bed before 10. However, for children, it's different, and children need growth hormones. So when they go to sleep, They are able to produce more growth hormones, which is not being produced as much as an adult. And so a child who goes to bed at 8 o'clock at night gets an opportunity for 2 sleep cycles. They very often wake up in the middle of the night, and they're able to get up earlier. And that second sleep cycle is an extra dose of growth hormone, naturally occurring growth hormones, which helps them through puberty and helps them develop muscles and everything that they need to be a well-adjusted adult in the future. So there are 2 different models here that impact a time someone should go to sleep, both based on health, but different for a child and different for an adult. So we as adults usually simplify it and say, you're going to bed at 8 because I told you to go to bed at 8, and we're going to bed at 10, and if you don't go to bed at 8, then we won't be able to go to bed at 10 because we've got about 2 hours of winding down before we can sleep. The key here is, how do you know what is good? So the goodness is, does this activity produce additional benefits that don't require any additional inputs? So a kid may not want to go to bed at 8 o'clock, but it is good for them to go to bed because they're going to gain the benefits of better cognitive function the next day, the opportunity for 2 cycles of growth hormones, the opportunity for their brain to store information and process information, and then ultimately a regulated cycle. And I guess the 6th benefit is that the parents get a little quiet time together. Now, we know that activity is good without explaining it because it has all these extra benefits. Now, on the adult side, same thing, different reasons. So we need to process the things that we've seen all day, that kind of stuff. So we can now judge what is good and what is bad. Now, it might feel good to stay up late, watch a movie, have some entertainment and stuff like that, but could those activities be done in the morning, waking up earlier? Like, would you still desire those activities after a good night's sleep? And what we find that is the way our brain functions is that our brain can trick ourselves into believing something is good for us in the moment that is actually bad for us over time. So as we're judging what is good and what is bad, we have to look at, is this something I desire now? Is this something that I because I'm in a fatigue state, want? Or is this something that is an investment in my future self? Is this something that if I do it right now, like going to bed a little bit earlier, I will have greater benefits of increased functionality, productivity, clarity of mind. These are the things that happen if you go to bed early. This is how humans function. Now, in order to do this, we have to remove what is bad. And we can remove it, but we may also want to replace it because it's easier to sustain a behavior if you're replacing bad behaviors with good behaviors. So what kinds of behaviors may distract us from the sleep time? And this is just one example, but it's an example that we can all relate to. And I find myself having this problem sometimes myself. I've had an exciting day, and I need some time to wind down before I can go to bed. And I say, well, look, I'm just going to check the YouTubes. I'm going to go watch a movie. And the next thing you know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm still awake, and I've got to get up at 8 o'clock tomorrow, and it's all just a wreck. So what do? Well, we remove the distractions. We remove the behaviors that are not good. So going to bed on time or at a reasonable time with a wind down. So maybe you're, sit down, tidy up the house a little bit. You sit down with a cup of herbal tea, talk with your spouse a little bit, maybe plan the next day, and then you're tired and ready to go to bed. No distractions. You're just chilling and going to bed. The distractions to that would be watching a stimulating movie. Now, you can watch a movie that's kind of relaxing, maybe a nature documentary or something like that. But again, the visual stimulation is causing you to wake up because as your brain receives the visual stimulus, it needs to be alert in order to continue to receive it because your body is sitting there trying to receive it. And then, of course, if it's like an action movie, you're going to have the suspense and the excitement that's going to make you want to stay up and watch it. You are in a situation now where you have to remove that distraction, that bad, and replace it with something good, which could be a non-visual stimulus such as music, could be dimming the lights a little bit, it could be reading a book because that's more of a linear stimulation rather than the random stimulation of a television show. Do you see where I'm coming from here? We want to look at what is good because it has the longest sustainable holistic growth or value to you as an individual. Now, there are problems with this. If you are voting for what is good for you without considering what is good for other people, you'll very often vote in and gain unintended consequences. So if you are, and a lot of political parties will do this, they'll say, hey, look, seniors, this candidate's going to cut your benefits. Well, if you don't have any context about why they may cut the benefits, it's possible that your benefits are harming other people. It's possible that the benefits are poorly managed and structured poorly in a way that are actually making it difficult for you to even receive benefits in the future anyway. My point being is if you make a vote or you support an idea that only benefits you, the unintended consequences are the negative impact on other people and that creating pressure for them to take what you've got. And I know that's a little simplistic, but we want to do what is right independent of morals of that day, and taking care of your neighbors so that you have strong neighbors is a long-term and sustainable solution. So when you vote, if you don't consider the impact of the legislation on the broadest amount of people, you very often can vote in something that is meant to take away rights from you in the future. So, and I'm not sure if we talked about this in another podcast, but there's a ratcheting element that you can do as a political party. They'll put out one piece of legislation that really benefits a specific group that's a large enough voting block to get the legislation through. Then they'll do another piece of legislation that supports another voting block big enough to get the legislation through. And then at the end, they'll wrap up all that legislation that ends up hurting everybody, including those who previously benefited from the legislation. And it's a social engineering concept that is quite readily available. Now, again, if you are looking in your family, you can judge what is good, what is bad for the family. But when you start expanding the community, you have to have the same context of what is good or bad for the entire community, not just your family in that community. So let's wind this up a little bit. Very often, religions, cultures, communities defined social norms around what is good and beneficial for the continuation of that community. These are good foundations to start with, but must be considered in the larger context when we have such a global world today. So there's nothing wrong with having the Amish community, for example, and the Mennonite community, and the Mormons community, and the other, these religious communities. There's nothing wrong with that. They don't hurt anybody. They're only helping themselves, and they're doing so in a way that they're within society. The problem comes is when there becomes this one global community, or this one political community, or this one nationalized or wide-standing way of thinking. Because now it's difficult to do that independent judging of good versus evil or good versus bad because there are so many consequences. So we've seen this lately with canceling, people getting canceled. So if you were strong and independent in your community and you had the moral support, you were immune to being canceled. However, if you're constantly trying to please the population or masses, such as like influencers on YouTube, podcasters, people like that, they don't want to upset anybody. So they want to try to adjust their behavior without the judgment of what is good and what is bad and what is beneficial and what is not beneficial and what has the most sustainable holistic outcome, meaning it produces beneficial results without any additional input. They very often will cater to the mob, and we've talked about this in mass idea formation, and we've talked about this in the mind control programs. Ultimately, masses of people who are not thinking are extremely dangerous because they are easy to manipulate. And so you can manipulate these large masses that aren't judging good versus evil. They aren't judging short-term versus long-term benefits. They aren't looking at actual data as far as making informed decisions. That is extremely bad. However, within your community, you can gain the stability of doing what is right for your community with the observation of what is right for the people around you. And what ends up happening is you end up with like an Orthodox Jewish community who doesn't do the COVID lockdowns, ends up everybody gets COVID, and then they benefit from natural immunity, just like the Amish did. And then so they recovered, as a community, they recovered faster. It could be a religious group who is being persecuted by a secular organization, and they stay true to their values for thousands of years, and they build a strong bond. They have their own independent food networks. They have their own independent resources. It could be an immigrant community, someone who's gone to another country, and they've connected with people who also, expatriates from their same country, and they provide comfort and security to each other. When you have hundreds of these groups, what ends up happening is you end up with a more stable society. Yes, there's infighting. Yes, there are concerns that one group, what they believe may not be the right thing in this other group. But again, the long-term benefit is being able to see how other people solve problems and then being able to adopt the most important and valuable solutions into your own community. And I'll leave you with one last point, and it's a judgment. When someone says cultural appropriation is bad, they're doing that as a knee-jerk reaction to a social movement rather than someone actually sitting down and thinking. If one culture develops a medical procedure that is unique to their culture, informed by their cultural activities, and then it works very well, why would it be bad to share that with other people? So, for example, in the Japanese culture, the kimono literally means something to wear, by the way, but the kimono is a specific type of Japanese dress, and they're very happy for people to wear it because it extends the value and demand for something that is very important in their culture. Now, they want you to wear it respectfully, but ultimately, as long as you're wearing it, they benefit because they originated the culture. So when we talk about what is good and what is bad, and someone says, hey, this culture is hurting people, we can objectively look at it, but we can also develop and extract from it the valuable elements. So maybe it's a durable piece of clothing that was worn by Eskimos and now can save lives being adapted into cold weather gear for fishermen. See, this is not hurting anything to appropriate what is good. However, we must have good judgment and rational thinking around identifying what is good so that we can borrow it. Then once we borrow it, we have to understand the context of that element so that we can implement it for maximum benefit. Now again, this is where we are slowing down our decision-making cycles. We're looking at both present-term benefit and long-term benefit, and then we are making judgments on good versus evil. Other people don't need to change. If there were no evil people, we would not know and see the contrast of the good people. See, so we don't have to have other people change. We don't really care what they do as much as are the things that we choose to do benefiting ourselves and family. Are they benefiting our community? Are they free of unintended consequences because we actually thought out what it would be like if this is in place? And are they the natural activities that nature itself reinforces so that once you put in the input, it continues? So it's like planting a seed at the right time of the year, in the right soil temperature, with the right water. The seed grows, and there's not much effort required. But if you're going to grow that same seed in an environment that's not holistically aligned with what the seed wants, then you will have an uphill battle and it'll require more resources and more effort. So I want to leave you with this one last thing, is that the thing that is good across generations, across civilizations, across long time periods, tends to be the thing that creates the best outcomes consistently. It may not be the most convenient thing to do. You may want to stay up late, but it's more convenient for you to go to bed early over time, because ultimately you have better health outcomes. You may want to have other people do things a certain way, but the contrast of their negative behaviors reinforces the value of your good behaviors, and ultimately you don't need to publicly judge anyone. You can just focus on the activities that you choose to do. But in looking at this, whether you're in a religious standpoint or you're in a secular standpoint, the things that are good have the least unintended consequences, and they are sustainably and holistically amplifications of value. This is extremely important to understand. Now, I know this has been a little bit esoteric. It's been a little bit of metaphoric in the sense of my delivery. That's because of the time period that we have a short time frame in a podcast. But if you have specific questions about determining what is good in a business process, what is good in a strategic approach, what is good in our day-to-day application of the principles of strategic relations, then visit me at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Go to the contact page and ask your questions. I'm Justin Hitt. I'm the publisher of Inside Strategic Relations newsletter that helps you transform business relationships into profits guaranteed. We talk about critical thinking. We talk about our ability to make good decisions and beneficial decisions. And we talk about the strategy that's necessary to function in a world that sometimes is quite chaotic and counterproductive. Again, I appreciate you being a part of this podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.